Hey everyone, my name is Morten, or Essa as my friends call me, and welcome to my gaming cave. In this video, we will take a closer look at how to play the L1Z1X Mindnet. First, I will go through a few of this faction's abilities, so that we know which ones to use when we play the first game round. Then I will demonstrate how the first round can be played with the Diplomacy card. This will be followed by a short walkthrough of the remaining faction abilities, and at the end of the video, I will tell you what technologies I would research so that you can become a strong player in the mid and late game. But first, let's have a look at the agent. With our agent, we get to replace one infantry with a mech. And this is of course a good thing, because the mech is so much stronger than the infantry. It rolls better and it has sustained damage. But you need to be aware of the timing window, because the infantry has to be on the planet before the activation happens. I wish that the timing window was slightly different, so that we could use it during the movement step, so that we could get our mechs out in this way, and they could help us explore hazardous planets. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So the trick here is to always leave behind at least one infantry in your home system. So whenever you activate that, and that is usually to produce more units, then you get to replace one of those infantry with a mech, and then the mech is ready to fly out with your other units in the next game round. Next we will dive into the first round demonstration, but first let's have a look at our starting units and starting technologies. We start with a carrier and a L1Z1X Super Dreadnought. Both of these units have capacity, but note here that the L1Z1X Super Dreadnought has capacity 2 instead of 1. And this may seem like a minor detail, but it's actually huge. And simply because we want to change what units we want to produce during the game. And I will come back to that a little later in the video. Then we have 5 infantry and 3 fighters, 1 space stock and 1 PDS. So we can easily gain control of up to 5 planets in 2 systems in round 1. Then we start with Neuromotivator that will give us 2 action cards instead of 1 in each status phase. And we also start with plasma scoring, so that we get to roll 1 extra die every time we either use Bombardment or fire our space cannons. And I will also get back to this technology a little later in the video. So all in all, we have the units and the technologies to get a good start, but I still think we have one problem to solve in round 1, and that is how to spend the 5 resources in our home system twice. And that's because Dreadnoughts are expensive, and we also want to research one technology. So let's have a closer look at how that can be done. Alright, let's see how the first round can go with the Diplomacy card. And I've also prepared the Warfare player and the Technology player in these 2 corners. And that's because those are the strategy cards we want to do the secondary of, because the goal is to use the 5 resources in our home system twice. So, as our first action, let's move out here to Lysis and Velnor with a carrier and 3 infantry and a fighter. And let's have a look at Lysis first. Local fabricators, you may gain 1 commodity. Yeah, so that's what we do. We won't get any of the other things. And on Velnor, let's see what we get here. Abandoned warehouses. You may gain 2 commodities, or you may convert up to 2 of your commodities to trade goods. And I choose to convert this one to a trade good, so that we have it available. Now the other players take their turns, and it gets to be us again. So now let's fly out to perimeter here with our Dreadnought. And we have 2 in capacity, so let's bring a fighter along with the infantry. And let's see what we get. A green relic fragment. Alright. So in the best of worlds, either the Warfare player or the Technology player decides to play their cards, but not both of them at the same time, because otherwise we cannot play Diplomacy in between and unexhaust our home system here. But let's just say that the Warfare player takes 1 more tactical action, but when it gets to be the Technology player, he plays the Technology card. So we spend a token from our strategy pool, and we need to pay 4 resources, but can only pay 5, so we have to do that. And then we can get Dark Energy Tap. And that's because I want to explore these 2 frontier tokens here. But we could also go for Psychoarchaeology, so that we can get Hypermetabolism when we take in round 2, and then we will get 3 command tokens instead of 2 in every round. But I prefer to get Dark Energy Tap, so we can explore these tokens before any other player eventually takes them. And now that it gets to be our turn, we want to play the Diplomacy card, because we can unexhaust our home system, so let's do that. And we can just take any of the 3 other planets. They are all 2 resources. And let's just say we Diplomacy this system in here. And when it gets to be the Warfare player, then if we are lucky, then he decides to play that card. But let's say we are not. So when it gets to be our turn, we have to use our last tactical action to produce units in our home system. And we have 7 + 1 resources to produce for, but I want to save the trade good. So I activate the home system, and the timing window is that we actually replace the infantry with a mech, and then we get to produce afterwards, like so, for 7 resources, and I'll leave that one behind. And then at some point in time, the warfare player decides to play his card, but we are out of actions for now. So now we have gained control of 2 systems. We have produced some more units in our home system ready to fly out in the next game round. And we also got Dark Energy Tap, so we can explore these frontier tokens from round 2. The reason why I went with the diplomacy card in this example was that I wanted to be in control of when I could unexhaust my home system. And that's because I think ideally we want to do the secondary of both warfare and technology in round 1. But I don't think there is one strategy card that is so much better for the LI6 Mindnet than others. So I've actually only included this single first round demonstration in this video. And if you want to see more first round demonstrations for the LI6 Mindnet, then I have bundled the remaining ones, and I will link to that video at the end of this one. But my recommendation throughout your game is to pick both leadership and technology as often as you can during the game. Leadership because we have a pretty bad command token economy, and technology because we need quite a bit of technology to get our super dreadnoughts upgraded to tier 2. The LI6 Mindnet is both a dreadnought and a bombardment faction, so 4 of their faction abilities are of course related to this. First off, we have the commander, and to unlock him we need to have 4 dreadnoughts out on the game board. But this is not something I would rush to do. I would rather focus on scoring objectives in the beginning, and that's because when we get to unlock him, then we are allowed to bombard on planets even though they have PDSs on them. And this is normally exclusive to Warzons. But since we rarely need to bombard planets this early in the game, then I don't think this is something we need to rush. But if there are any strong PDS factions in the game, like the X-Char Kingdom or the Titans of Ul, then they may start to fear us if we go near them with a fleet of dreadnoughts and our commander unlocked. And indulging other players in fear or having the upper hand when negotiating is always a fun part of playing Twilight Imperium. But since we need to produce 4 dreadnoughts to unlock the commander, and eventually we want to do that, then this extra capacity on our dreadnoughts becomes handy, because now we can use the dreadnoughts to mobilize our ground forces, so we have less need to produce more carriers. But dreadnoughts are not the only unit we have that have bombardment. So let's take a look at our Mechs. Then we can see that they also have the bombardment ability whenever they are in the space area or being transported. They are just not as strong as our dreadnoughts, since they only hit on an 8 and above, where our dreadnoughts hits on a 5. We can also upgrade our super dreadnoughts to tier 2, and then both the bombardment and the space combat abilities are increased from 5 to 4. And I think this is significant, because now our dreadnoughts will hit statistically 70% of the time. And I think that is enough for our opponents to think twice before they decide to attack us. But to get the upgraded super dreadnoughts, we need to research 2 blue technologies and 1 yellow. So without any tick skips in those colors, then the unit upgrade is a little far away. But at the end of the video, I will tell you what technologies I would research so that we can get the upgraded super dreadnoughts. The last faction ability we have related to bombardment is called Harrow. And with this ability, we are allowed to bombard on a planet after each round of ground combat. So we may not be able to bring as many infantry on our dreadnoughts compared to on carriers. But I think to some extent that this faction ability makes up for that. And we also have plasma scoring that allows one of our dreadnoughts to roll an extra die every time it bombards. So I think the LI6 Mindnet is pretty good at taking planets, also from the Federation of Sol or the Albeck, who are usually really good at holding planets. LI6 Mindnet has another faction ability called Assimilate. And with this ability, we get to replace each PDS and or space stock on a planet when we gain control of it from another player. And this can of course be helpful if we want to score any structure objectives. But in my experience, this ability is rarely used, simply because gaining control of more structures in this way requires much more effort compared to just taking the construction card ourselves. But of course, if we are already at war with that other player, and then we can get closer to scoring that objective and make it harder for him to do so, and we also gain control of a planet from him, then it can of course be worth it. But one of the cool things about gaining control of a space dock in this way is that we get to replace it with our own before the production step. And that means that in the very same activation where we took the space dock, we also get to produce units there. So now we can easily defend the system from any retaliation attacks. Now let's talk about the Flagship. The Flagship is one of the strongest one in the game. First of all, it rolls 2 dice and hits on a 5, which is the strongest in the game. And then it has a pretty cool special ability as well, and that is that any hits produced by our Flagship or Dreadnoughts must be assigned to non-fighter ships if able. So in this way we can take out the strong ships first, and then we can focus on the fighters afterwards. Just be aware of any strong fighter factions like Narlo, for instance, who has crystal fighters. In this case, our Flagship is not strong enough, so here we still need upgraded destroyers with their anti-fighter barrage. There is just one thing I don't understand, and that is that the L1Z1X Mindnet is a bombardment faction. So why in the world doesn't our Flagship have the bombardment ability? That I don't understand. I wish I could answer this, but I can't. So let's move on to the hero instead. And we unlock him by having 3 scored objectives, and when we do, we have an action. Choose one system that does not contain other players' ships. You may move your Flagship and any number of your Dreadnoughts from other systems into the chosen system. Then purchase this card. So let's say that we play this as an action now. And if we want, then we could potentially fly our Flagship out to Malice here if no one else has found this system during the game. And in this way we can gain control of a legendary planet and get the trade goods there and the extra influence, which is always good. But it could also help us score 2 public objectives, like have units in 3 systems on the edge of the game board or other than your home system, and Malice is on the edge of the game board. But it could also be make history, have units in 2 systems that contain legendary planets, Megator Rex or anomalies. But it could also be that we want to say hello to Woolwraith Cabal up here. There's an empty system here next to their home system, and we could potentially move some Dreadnoughts along with us. We only have fleet supply for 3 ships, so let's do that. And we are allowed to bring ground forces from systems that contain our command tokens. And then as our second action, we can activate Woolwraith home system here and fly in. And that could potentially help us score. Unveil Flagship, win a space combat in a system that contains your Flagship. You cannot score this objective if your Flagship is destroyed in the combat, and it will probably survive this. Or simply darken the skies, win a combat in another player's home system. So I think this is a very strong hero, and it can be used in many different situations. So it's just a matter of reading the map and see where you get the most out of him. Now let's talk about technology. And I think the primary goal for the L1Z1X Mindnet is to get the upgraded Super Dreadnoughts. And for that we need 2 blue technologies and 1 yellow. But we also have a pretty bad command token economy. So if we for instance have a green tech skip planet, then I would prioritize to get hypermetabolism optimally in round 2. Simply because then we get 3 command tokens in every status phase instead of 2. And if we don't have a green tech skip planet, we could consider getting Psychoarchaeology if we have any other tech skip planets in our slice. Then I would start going for the Super Dreadnoughts. And here we need to choose between Anti-Master Flectors and Dark Energy Tab. And if I can get to explore 2 or maybe 3 Frontier tokens, then I would go for Dark Energy Tab, because we can be lucky to find both command tokens and trade goods behind those tokens. And then we need to choose between either Gravity Drive, that gives one of our ships extra movement, and Sling Relay, so that we can produce 1 more ship in every round. Both of these technologies are pretty strong, and I think it's entirely up to your playstyle and personal preference which one you want to get there. Then we need a yellow technology, and here we can choose between either Sarween Tools, that gives us a production discount, or Scanning Drone Network. And with the Scanning Drone Network, we can, when we activate one of the systems where we already control the planet and we have a ground force on it, then we get to explore that planet. And I think that can help our resource and or influence economy if we are lucky to find any planet attachments. But there is also a pretty good synergy with our agent here, because that also required that we had an infantry on the planet when we activate the system. So with the Scanlink drone network, we can both explore the planet, but we can also exhaust our agent and replace one of those infantry with a mech. So I think Scanlink drone network is a little bit better than Sarween tools in this case. Then I would go for the upgraded Super Dreadnought and probably follow it by fleet logistics and light wave deflectors afterwards. But I haven't even talked about our other faction technology called the inheritance systems. So let's talk about that now. We can spend 2 resources and then we can ignore any prerequisites when we want to research the technology. So this can be an easy way to get our Super Dreadnoughts upgraded to tier 2, or we could even go for Warsons if we want that. But inheritance systems require 2 yellow technologies, and I think this is an attempt to nudge us to go into the yellow tech tree. Because here we also find transit diodes where we can move our ground forces around at the end of our turn. But we can also get integrated economy so we can produce more units after gaining control of a planet. And I think transit diodes help us with the less capacity we have on the dreadnoughts compared to carriers. And then we can also use integrated economy to establish control of newly taken systems. But I only think this is viable in theory, because in my experience, planets rarely swap hands when we reach the mid to the late game. At least not to an extent where I think these yellow technologies are worth it. So in short, I wouldn't prioritize getting inheritance systems. I would instead get the blue technologies I recommended earlier so that we have the flexibility and the mobility to move around the game board instead. And with that, let's have a look at some more tips. The first tip is to try and avoid running out of command tokens. The thing is that our home system does not contain any influence at all. So make sure to have some influence heavy planets in your slice, or make sure to take one from one of your neighbors. The dreadnoughts are expensive to produce and they are effective, but you cannot really use them for anything if you don't have any tokens to move them around. Then the second tip is to sell your promissory note in every single round, and that's because the holder of your promissory note will get 1 extra command token in every status phase. So I think this is an easy sell for instance, 2 trinkets. And the last tip is to try and sell your agent's ability. And if you remember, it had this odd timing window where the infantry needed to be on the planet before the activation happens, and then you could replace that infantry with a mech. So if you notice another player is about to activate their home system to produce more units, you could try and sell your agent's ability for instance, 1 trinket, and then they get to replace one of their infantry with a mech. Just make sure it's not your immediate neighbors, so they use those mechs against you. The L1Z1X Mindnet is pretty good at scoring control objectives, but they are not as good at scoring those spend objectives. So I would recommend that every time you earn some trinkets, try to keep them on your command token sheet and save them in case a spend objective comes up later in the game. Both the faction ability called Assimilate, where we could replace each PDS and or space dock on a planet when we gain control of it, and the faction technology called inheritance systems are not that good in my opinion. But I think the Super Dreadnoughts with their space combat and bombardment capabilities easily make up for this. So if you feel like a game where you can use gun diplomacy and be one of the better factions at scoring those control objectives, then I think the L1Z1X Mindnet is the faction for you. As mentioned earlier, I only included 1 first round demonstration in this video, and if you want to see more, then you can click this video up here. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.